The David Webb Show.
Well, it's cleared out. That's what the mayor of New York says about the decision to end Occupy City Wall Street encampment. He said it was planned for weeks. The decision was made to move the protesters out of City Hall Park, and they began in the early morning hours. Now we will see this story develop. Will they come back tonight, as we saw in other areas around the country? So keeping an eye on that developing story. At least 7 people were arrested. Riot gear-clad officers protecting themselves while clearing out roughly 50 or so people remaining inside the encampment just before 4 a.m. So again, law and order to some degree, I suspect, has been restored, but will it stay? Steve Kardian, Trump 2020 Advisory Board member and a former New York police officer, joins me now. Steve, good morning.
Pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
Well, Steve, first, your reaction to action, at least in some form, finally being taken in New York City.
It's been slow to go, David. I understand that some of the protesters, or a good amount, have left, and that there was a lot of homeless people that were encamped there. So it being long overdue, they had their opportunity. They came in with what they should, a good degree of force, and they removed them and arrested those that didn't want to leave. So it's a start in the right direction, but we got about 1,000% more to get done there.
So let's talk about the after effects of this for a moment, and then we'll go to the broader topic of law and order. We've seen, Chaz in Seattle, or CHOP, I guess that was the name before they were broken up. We see what's going on in Portland. New York City is New York City. It gets the attention, the media attention, but there are other Occupy zones going on around America. And your point about the homeless component of this, that plays out sometimes in cities like Fresno, California. So it's not just the big cities, but if law enforcement as a whole and the leadership in these cities doesn't take action, what next?
Well, we see, of course, it's been said over and over that these are democratically run liberal cities. And when we look at Portland, we have horribly poor leadership under Ted Wheeler. He's having his officers stand down while the federal agents, federal officers, are defending their building. Now, the Portland police, just like police in New York, have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution and the state of Oregon, and to protect property and liberty. And they're being told not to do that. And I would imagine that they're chomping at the bit, that they're extremely frustrated because they want to do their job, and they're being told to stand down. And unfortunately, the federal officers, we work in tandem. We love our federal partners. They love us. We can't exist without them. They can't exist without us. And Ted Wheeler has hijacked that. Lori Lightfoot doesn't want the feds to come in, but they're going to come in. And she just had 15 people shot yesterday. She had 63 people, I believe it was, shot over the weekend. I mean, what is she waiting for?
Well, that's a very good question for those leaders. It's also a good question for the citizens who have to live with the problem. Back to New York for a moment, but going broader about cooperation between federal agencies, state agencies. The other day, Bill de Blasio said didn't want state police officers, New York state police officers in New York City. Now, I'm a New Yorker. I've been around it, the law enforcement community, long enough. I've testified for the State Police Chiefs Association at one time, a number of times. So I have known the cooperation that exists. When you do that, what kind of message are you sending when you're talking about removing $1 billion from the NYPD coffers, when you're talking about changing what happens in the protection of our students in schools, when in fact Department of Education in the city gives $300 million to NYPD as a part of that agreement? What are you doing to law enforcement, the community as a whole? What are you doing?
Well, they're defunding 1.5 million. The 600-man crime prevention street crime unit has been disbanded. Since as long as I have known, they were the premier group of people that got guns off the street. That's why we're seeing the surge. I understand yesterday, quietly, the vehicle and traffic unit was disbanded, as were officers that deal with the homeless, and they've been put back into the precincts. You look at the state police, you look at Westchester County, Suffolk County, you look at the Yonkers Police Department. They have all prohibited their officers from going into New York City to make arrests because of the laws that the city council passed. Hands off. The most effective techniques we use to take people into custody have been removed from the NYPD. And I've trained, I'm a use of force expert, I'm an early American Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I've trained many of the academy instructors and many of the police officers in the NYPD. And it's a shame. They're afraid to do their job, because if they inadvertently end up in a mount position with their knees straddled on someone's hips, or a knee inadvertently placed into a stomach, a back, a chest, they're going to face a misdemeanor charge, which is going to ruin and destroy their career.
You know, one of the most effective, and this is the data bears this out, I believe, on a national level, but one of the most effective ways to catch people who are wanted for a variety of crimes is something as simple as a traffic stop. Timothy McVeigh was caught, the Oklahoma City bomber, the federal building bomber, was caught in a traffic stop. So many times that interaction leads to taking dangerous people off the streets, but some jurisdictions want to remove that, and this whole idea of taking police away from what are, at least according to their view, non-violent crimes or criminality. Is there such a thing?
Well, unfortunately, politicians are dictating policy, and it's going to destroy them. Berkeley, California, for example, they have already passed a law, I think it takes effect at the beginning of next year, that civilians, unarmed civilians, will be making motor vehicle stops and issuing tickets. And like you just mentioned, spot on, that we get drug arrests, we get gun arrests, we get DWIs, and what are they going to do when they need to make an arrest? And some of our violent encounters, two incidents lead to violent encounters: domestic violence and vehicle and traffic stops, because you don't know what's on the other end of that steering wheel when you pull somebody over. It's a shot in the dark. And sometimes they're wanted people, sometimes there's drugs, sometimes there's guns. We've seen people that have been pulled over for D&T that have had kidnapped people. So it's going to be at a great loss. And, social workers coming to domestic violence. It's every time crisis intervention goes on a call, 95% of the time they want law enforcement there, because the person is usually unpredictable.
So let me take another step at this latest public debate. And this is the president talking about federal intervention. Of course, DHS has, under law, under U.S. code, the responsibility and the legal responsibility and back in to protect federal properties, whether it's in Portland or anywhere around the country, for example. And this is the debate now: federal intervention, to what extent, and of course the legal battle that is ensuing and that will likely ensue. How does the administration, how does the president work through this? And if you can't get cooperation from local law enforcement, obviously there's a very volatile situation.
Well, the 40 U.S. Code 1315 cited it allows federal officers to protect federal property. As a matter of fact, after I retired, I worked 3 years as a contractor for the United States Marshals down at Foley Square. And, we had Department of Homeland Security there. We had the court officers. We had the U.S. Marshals. Everybody ready to stand and protect that federal courthouse. So the president and the federal government, DHS and the Border Patrol, they're sending their agents into Portland. And they're being met with a lot of pushback, but they have the right to be there. If they observe, witness a crime being committed against any federal property, they have the right to arrest that person anywhere in the United States. So running across the street to grab them is being misrepresented by Mayor Wheeler. He's totally off base with their authority. They have the authority to be there. There is no doubt about that. Like I said, I've worked for the federal government, and they're a great group getting a good job done.
Well, this will be a trying time, to say the least, and of course the politics of it doesn't help it. Exit question on law enforcement and where we are in this country and law and disorder, Steve. Getting it under control matters, but the people that pay the price are the people left after Occupy leaves, after CHOP is broken up, after the protests, the riots. When it's all over and done, people's lives and livelihoods are left, and that has a huge economic impact, even as to the point of companies or people that I know who own companies saying they will not open franchises in these neighborhoods. They don't want to risk what happened at the Wendy's in Atlanta happening to their investment. That affects the people locally. So there are other effects from this.
Big time. And we've seen more than 500,000 people leave the city of New York. If you go to Pennsylvania, come up into the suburbs of Westchester, Long Island, Rockland County, the housing market is off the hook. People are looking for either a getaway or to relocate their family out of the city for a better life after what's happened. I mean, drive down New York City. I mean, you're there. We both go down to Fox and Friends and do segments. It's a complete mess. Who would want to open up a business after this? It's terrible what's been done to these business owners and the residents that live there.
Yeah, it's not just in these neighborhoods. I go down Fifth Avenue in New York, boarded up Microsoft store, boarded up businesses, Madison Avenue, and then you go into these neighborhoods, and whether it's a bodega somewhere in the city or, somebody's fighting to keep their business alive, this is not a good situation for these communities, and they're being destroyed little by little.
Yes, they are. And many of these people, many of the small business operators have huge rents, and they live basically month to month relying on their customer-based service. And, now we have what can be legal protests in the streets, but you can't go on a sidewalk and have a drink with a few people. It's just unheard of. It's got to get better, and it's got to get better soon, or it's going to crush everything in New York City.
All right, well, I'll leave it there, and we'll pick it up with Matt Whitaker on the other side of the break. Steve Kardian, Trump 2020 Advisory Board member. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.